Alright, hey everybody, Travis here from Intelligent Choice. So today we're going to be continuing our AI system architecture series where we're taking the triage system which we built in the last video and adding a strategic research layer to it. So now look, identifying a hot lead really is only step one. And in this environment, you're not the only one who knows about those leads as well. You're in a race essentially. Your competitors are fighting for that same business, looking at the same public data. And the real pain point here is speed to insight. So sales teams are under enormous pressure to gather that data and be able to draw out those insights before the trail goes cold, essentially. So most of the time, a lot of effort, money is wasted because the projects only produce a really generic pitch. And the standard these days is that business want a personalized strategy that addresses their specific business wants and needs. So, which brings us to the build in this video. So, what I'm going to do here is cover three important parts of our research tool. So, first is the methodology. So, how we architect a system that doesn't just produce data, but it creates a dynamic sales strategy. So, it connects the lead's specific needs directly to our offerings. And we're talking about reducing that noise and to accelerate engagement while minimizing those overhead costs as well. So second is we're going to be going under the hood. So we're going to be looking at how our tools and models interact in order to surface the right data. So the goal here is understanding how we effectively filter out that noise so we can only feed the really important gold standard data into the brain. And that's what helps us produce those really dynamic strategies. And what we call this one here is the battle card. And finally, look into the future. So what we're going to do is actually wrap this thing up by doing a bit of a quantitative cost-benefit analysis of this whole workflow. And we're going to look at how this framework can be implemented across multiple verticals before we close out. So let's get into it. Alright, so before we go into the hood, let's dive into the logic actually driving this tool, right? So AI research tools don't fail because of their inability to pull and process data, but because what they do is cast an incredibly wide net, which if you ask a model to research a company, you ain't going to end up with a highly generic summary. And in a sales environment where personalization is absolutely key, simply that's just not going to cut it. So with our approach here in the workflow we've created, I split into three specific steps, right? So first is target ingestion. So we don't just scrape the whole site. What we do is we take the sitemap and rather than scraping 200 pages, what we do is we use the AI summary we got from the triage part of our process earlier on, and then cross-reference it against the best offering that we can provide. So what it does at that point is it provides a targeted scrape. So what it does is it identifies the 5 most relevant pages, and what this does is it maximizes the data quality while minimizing those unnecessary costs and computing power, okay? So second is the signal filtering, right? And this is kind of where all the magic happens. We move from that wide net to an asynchronous approach that is able to sift through the noise. It strips away all of the unnecessary stuff like the nav bars, the about pages, all that kind of stuff. And what it does is it only feeds the model the really gold standard data, right? And what this does is it produces highly relevant insights. And really the point of this is to solve that pain point of speed to insight. Third and finally, right, is our strategy synthesis. So this is really where we produce that real big edge, right? So we take the insights and then we package them into what we call our FIA engine, right? So that's a fact, impact, and act engine. So what we do is we break the strategy down into three parts, right? So first is fact. So this is what we found out about the current stack that the business offers and their processes, so we can look at potential inefficiencies. Next is impact. So this is what we say is the actual cost of them staying on this path, where these leakages will occur. And finally, third is act. So we specifically look at how our offering is able to solve those gaps and create long-term value. And by architecting the flow in this way, the output isn't just a summary, it's a weapon. So we're moving from the generic question of, what is this company to a strategic answer of, how do we win this deal? All right, so let's bring this blueprint to life. So what we need here is a stack that is able to talk to each other seamlessly. So it's not just a collection of tools and models, it's a coordinated system that has been built for precision, right? So first is Ingestion, the orchestrator, which we covered in the AO's triage system as well. Right, so this is our command center. It's where we design the logic and manage those handshakes, right? The API calls that move the lead from being that raw submission through to the very polished finished strategy, right? So next is Firecrawl. So this is our data source, and probably my favorite, it's a specialized scraper. Right, so it has the ability to surface those really gold pieces of data that we need. And what it does is it maps out the digital footprint of a business in seconds. So what it does is it provides that sitemap, which is what the rest of our system is going to use to navigate their business. Next is AWS and Claude, so the brain essentially, and this is where all the heavy lifting happens. So what we do is we use AWS Lambda as our processing layers, right? So we run some code that's able to filter out the noise and identify pretty much those gold pieces of links, right, that we pull from. And then next is Claude, which we use via AWS Bedrock, right? So this acts as our reasoning engine, so we can take all of that refined data that we surfaced up from the scraping and then build out that actual FIA strategy. And finally, the execution layer, right? So this is the delivery point. So this is where we use the tool up here called PDF Monk, right? So it creates the battle card into a very polished and stylish strategy, clean PDF, right? So this is where it's then pushed directly to Slack, right? And this is what gives our sales team that really elite opening mood while all of the background strategy as well to get onto the lead while it's still hot. All right, so now it's time to actually get into the workflow itself and we can see how we've built this out, right? So just as with our triage system, we break this down into three key parts, right? So first is our data layer here. So this is where we're going to identify those 5 top URLs, which we'll then use to pull down those key pieces of golden data, right? So step 2 here is then using that data in order to create those really powerful insights that we're going to use to cross-reference against our offerings. And then finally, step 3 is our execution layer. So this is when we'll be taking all of those insights that we generated and we're going to be creating the very strong battle card PDF, which we can send to the sales team. So let's get started with the data phase first, right? So this one here. So as we know, the research tool that we've got here follows on from the triage system. So let's just take a quick look back and we can see here, so at this point we've identified our hot leads and then we notify the sales team here and then that automatically triggers the research tool. So let's just get back to that. Right, so in the first part here, what we've done is we can see the clients that we've identified that be hot leads, right? So we've got ShipBob here, Zero Fulfillment Specialist company. So what they're doing is they're looking for perhaps a triage system of their own. So we'll be able to take the AI summary we had of them. We then can map that against our offerings, which is our own sales and triage intelligence system, which we'll then use to pull through those insights once we get those top URLs. So the next stage here is getting the digital footprint of ShipBob, right? So this is when we start using our scraper, Firecrawl. So let's get into that there. So with just any other external tool that we call on, Ingestion creates that handshake, which we have already looked into. So we have the API key here for Firecrawl. So what are we doing here? Essentially what we've done is we've used a single token in order to get the entire sitemap of ShipBob. So you might be asking the question, well, why not just scrape the entire site? And it's a good question because when you look at here, we've got thousands upon thousands of links. And just the sheer cost and token usage for that is significantly more than just using a single token just to get that sitemap. And the way that we leverage that is by using AWS Lambda here. So this is going to be where we perform that function. So let's just jump into it here. So you can see that the output here is that we've got those top 5 URLs that link specifically to our offering to get those really golden pieces of data. So how do we go about doing that? So let's just jump into AWS. And we look at our navigator node. So this is the one that allows us to crawl through that sitemap and find those top URLs. So let's just jump into it now. Right, so we can see with the code here, once it loads up, that the Lambda function takes on a type of persona, right? So we're a sales engineer for intelligent choice, and our goal is to find those top 5 URLs that link up to our offering. We also have this exclusion list here, and this is really important because when Lambda is going through and performing that function to find those key pieces of information through the URLs, we don't want to have any of this rubbish here, so it's social media, all this kind of stuff, and that's what reduces that noise, which is incredibly important when we're trying to find contextual pieces of information rather than just absolute rubbish like about us page or like a Twitter feed or something along those lines. So once we've got that and we've got these URLs here, we can move into our next step, which is the brain. So we'll get onto that right now. All right, so this step, the brain, this is where all the magic happens. So we're looking at these three here. So what we're going to do is split this into two parts, right? So first is pulling that data through, and then second is pushing it into our model in order to create those really strong insights and format strategies. So let's just start with the pulling first. Right, so what we're going to be doing is calling back on Firecrawl. And what we're going to be doing is performing what we call a batch scrape. So essentially what you do is you take the 5 URLs that we pulled before, and then it pulls all of the data off those pages and then combines it into one combined output here. So you might be asking yourself the question, well, why do we perform a batch scrape rather than just going one by the pages? And the way that AI models work is they rely on context. So basically, if you went one by one, you'd be breaking it down into just single blocks. But by performing a batch scrape, you're giving the model a far larger picture of what's going on. And what that pretty much allows it to do is create far more sharper insights that are relevant to the offerings that we provide, and then combine those into that full strategy for our sales team to utilize. So let's actually jump into AWS again and look at how Claude does that, right? So basically the output here is just going to be a bunch of text, but that's going to be our full battle card right here. So, well, how do we get to this output? And that's a question. So we've got our second function within AWS, which is our battle card engine. So by calling on Claude here, and we're just going to wait for the code to pick up, you're taking on the persona of an AI solution architect. So basically what we're doing is creating that FIA Battle Card. So the great thing about this is it's going to be consistent across any lead possible. So we break that down into the three parts, right? So we've got the facts. So we look at the current tech stack of the company and the pain points that they're experiencing. Second being the impact. So what's the cost of continuing on this path? You know, where are the potential leakages or, you know, prolonged inefficiencies within the team? And then third being the action, and that's when we step into the party here, and we provide those personalized insights relevant to our offerings and how we can actually solve those problems for the team. So let's just jump back out here and we look at the output here. So basically what we're going to be doing in the next step is packaging this up into a hyper-personalized battle card for our sales team to get onto. Right, so let's get into that. Right, so final step time, let's get into the execution layer right here. Okay, so in order to create that super polished personalized PDF, we need to provide some formatting to the text that we got out from Claude here. So let's look at this markdown node. Essentially what it does is it takes the text from Claude and then it adds some formatting. So it creates HTML. So we take the text here, we run it through the markdown node and we get the HTML, which we're then going to feed into our PDF monk tool. So we'll go over here and look at this one. So again, we use NAN to set up that handshake with PDF Monk. We've got the API key, and we take the now HTML and we feed that in. And we add some formatting as well. So we use some CSS, so we can see that there. So we're setting up the PDF to look super professional. We've got our style card there, the headings, the size, everything you could possibly think of. And that comes out with our final PDF. So let's take a look at that now. So we've got our battle card for ShipBob. Right, so we can see we've got our standardized framework, right? So we've got the facts, so we've looked in, we've found exactly what they're offering, their current tech stack, and perhaps where those pain points are. And then we move down and we look at impact, so the cost of staying on this path essentially. So this provides our sales team with all of the information that they'll need to know about what potentially could happen and the impact of doing that. So potential leakages, revenue loss, inefficiencies within their teams, and then finally act. So this is where we get that sound strategy, the super personalized stuff for our sales team. So we have all of this information, and what we do is we actually create a specific pitch for ShipBob based on all of the insights that we've pulled relevant to our offerings, and we provide our sales team members with perhaps an opening move. So for this one here, they're using a dual CRM. And that whole technical debt can be addressed with the intelligent choice triage system. Final step now is then taking that PDF and sending it through to Slack. So the beauty of this workflow is that we can use the RAM, which has the PDF in it, in order to automate that post to Slack. Right, so we go in here and we set it up so we can make sure that we've got the hot leads being identified at ShipBob. We've got the hook here, so we're offering up our triage system, and then we automate that post, right? So it goes through into Slack here, and we can see the hot leads being identified, and we've got the PDF attached, which is pretty amazing, which happens within less than 3 minutes for our sales team since the lead has been identified. Right, so let's just click out of this here and take stock. So what we've done is we've created an automated workflow that has the ability to take the raw data from our lead, break that down into hyper-personalized insights and a strategy, and then have packaged that up in a super polished professional PDF. And I think for any business, that's a very, very effective way of reducing that pain point that we outlined at the beginning of speed to insight, right? So by doing this, you're preparing your sales team with a personalized strategy in a few minutes that they can use, they can get in that super fast environment and sell the client. Right, so let's look at the math of all of this. So when you look at the performance gap between manual research and intelligent automation, really the numbers don't just change, they collapse. And this is how we solve that initial pain point, the speed to insight that we talked about at the beginning. Right, so let's first look at speed. So what would normally take an analyst about an hour, we can automate in less than 3 minutes. And in a competitive race where the difference between being first at the table with a personalized strategy versus being last with just a generic summary is huge. Next is the depth of this research. So we move from just surface level discovery to really what I'd describe as a deep dive and analysis. We're finding those technical smoking guns, so the inefficiencies and the leakages that a human simply doesn't have enough time to hunt for in that 60 minutes. Next is consistency, right? So this one's pretty simple. So we're replacing, variable human error with our standardized FIA Battle Card engine, right? So we're ensuring that every prospect gets that personalized A-game strategy every single time. Next is the economics of all this. So you're moving from, what could be minimum wage being $25 up to $50 for an analyst per lead. And we reduce this down to less than $1 in just terms of tokens and computing power. But honestly, the real win here is scalability, right? So in a manual world where more leads mean, increased headcount and overhead, with our architecture, you can scale this infinitely with pretty much cost to zero minimal marginal costs, right? You're ensuring that every lead is met with that sophisticated, personalized opening move that is data-backed, and while it's most importantly, the trail is still hot. So you're scaling your output without scaling your overhead and minimizing those opportunity costs. The beauty of this framework within AWS ecosystem is that you're not locked into a single provider, right? So what we've done is we've invested in a permanent system. So if a new model comes along, like a new ChatGPT or Gemini, we don't have to completely rebuild the workflow. All we have to do is within Bedrock and AWS, call on that different model, which is pretty amazing. So what you've done is dodged all of that technical debt and you don't have to rebuild the workflow. So, when we look at this framework, it's what I'd describe as agnostic. And what it always allows you to do is to point to that core problem. We can get the URL, we can dive into the company, and we can surface those really, like I said, gold data, those insights, and be able to provide them to our customers. But let's look at perhaps a few other verticals really quickly. So maybe in software as a service or professional services, you can look at the documentation and integration pages, and you could find new technical debt, like, we're talking about dual CRMs perhaps, and, we find a way to reduce those inefficiencies and plug those holes and, increase long-term value very, very easily for your teams. But another industry I've been involved in is travel and tourism, right? So you could do a complete sort of audit of the booking process and your FAQs in order to reduce that booking friction. And it's a great way to sort of speed up the process and make sure that you keep those hot leads, like we've described, on the hook so they don't go and look at the competition. The thing is that, what we're doing is we're not pitching features, we're taking a look at those pain points experienced by these companies, their inefficiencies and potential leakages, and mapping that back to the offerings that we can provide to solve those issues. And that's what makes this whole intelligent automation system so special. Look, so at the end of the day, this isn't just about automation, right? It's about designing how your business thinks. You've got these systems that handle the noise and perform the research, so your people can actually move that needle. They focus on those relationships and providing these strategies which are hyper-personalized. So in the next video, what we're going to do is even dive deeper into this intelligence layer. So what we're going to do is help bridge that gap between live conversation and your CRM. So I'll show you how you can essentially build an agentic assistant so they can actually maintain sort of a back and forth dialogue using the memory in those models to stay in context and be able to identify buyer intent in real time. So your team's able to surface the exact data you'll need and to provide those insights to keep the prospect on the line. So just as always, if you want to explore how this kind of AI system architecture fits into your own operations, or you just like to have a chat about automation in general, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a chat with you. But until then, I'll catch you in the next one.